A lie can travel through an entire territory before the truth ever takes its first step. The execution platform stood above the center of Moonfall Court like a shadow carved into stone, overlooking thousands of wolves gathered beneath the fading evening sky. Eloria Voss knelt at its center. Cold iron circled her wrists, but she barely noticed it anymore. What she noticed were the eyes. Everywhere she looked, eyes followed her. Some were filled with anger, some with curiosity, others with disappointment. 3 days ago, most of these people barely knew her name. Now every wolf in Moonfall territory seemed to know exactly who she was supposed to be. A traitor, a criminal, a danger to the pack. The labels had spread faster than wildfire, faster than facts, faster than truth. A cool breeze lifted strands of her honey-blonde hair as she slowly raised her head toward the western horizon. The setting sun painted the sky with deep shades of crimson and gold. Less than an hour remained before sunset. Less than an hour before the council's sentence became final. Around the plaza, spectators filled every balcony, every staircase, and every walkway overlooking the court. Wolves had traveled from settlements more than 50 miles away to witness the event. Merchants had closed their shops early. Families had postponed evening meals. Even visiting alphas from neighboring territories had arrived to watch. To them, this was history. To Eloria, it was the end of everything she had ever known. A murmur moved through the crowd as several alpha nobles stepped onto the elevated council platform. Their polished uniforms reflected the flickering torchlight lining the stone walls. Their expressions remained calm, certain, untouched by doubt. Eloria recognized every face. She had treated their children when winter sickness spread through the territory. She had spent long nights preparing remedies for their households. She had delivered medicine during storms when few others were willing to leave their homes. Yet not one of them had spoken on her behalf. Not one. Councillor Malrek Duskbane slowly rose from his seat. His black cloak shifted behind him as silence gradually spread across the enormous plaza. Thousands of voices faded until only the distant sound of wind remained. Malrek surveyed the crowd before turning his attention toward the woman kneeling below. "The sentence stands," he announced. His voice echoed across Moonfall Court. At sunset, Eloria Voss will answer for her crimes against the pack. Cheers erupted from one section of the audience. Elsewhere, wolves remained silent. Some lowered their eyes. Others exchanged uncertain glances. But uncertainty had never saved anyone. Eloria understood that now. She lowered her gaze toward the ancient stone beneath her knees. The platform had witnessed generations of ceremonies, mating vows, leadership oaths, celebrations, new beginnings. Somehow she had become the first Omega in decades to kneel there awaiting judgment. The thought might have been amusing under different circumstances. 3 days earlier, she had awakened expecting an ordinary morning. Her life had always been quiet, predictable, simple. She lived alone in a small cottage near the northern forest. She spent her days gathering herbs, helping injured animals, and preparing remedies for anyone who needed them. She never sought attention. She certainly never sought power. Yet everything changed when an alpha noble was discovered unconscious near the northern border of the territory. Rumors began before sunrise. Evidence appeared before noon. Witnesses emerged before evening. Every accusation somehow pointed directly toward her. Too perfectly, too conveniently. It felt less like an investigation and more like a story that had already been written long before she ever stepped into it. "Look at her," a voice whispered somewhere within the crowd. "She doesn't even seem sorry." Another voice quickly answered. "That's because she knows what she did." More whispers followed. Eloria ignored them. There was no point arguing with people who had already decided who she was. Above the valley, dark clouds gathered around the distant mountains. Several guards noticed them. So did a few of the older wolves standing near the front of the plaza. The weather had been clear all week. Yet now thick gray clouds slowly spread across the horizon as though drawn by an invisible hand. The wind strengthened. Torches flickered. Unease moved quietly through the crowd. Then something unexpected happened. A deep sound rolled across the distant mountains. Not thunder. Not quite. It was lower than thunder. Older somehow. The strange vibration passed through the valley and vanished. Most wolves dismissed it immediately. Eloria could not. Her heartbeat suddenly accelerated. Once. Twice. Hard enough that she felt it in her chest. For reasons she could not explain, a memory surfaced. Crimson eyes watching her from deep within a forest clearing. Ancient eyes. Intelligent eyes. Eyes that had looked directly into her soul. The image appeared and disappeared in an instant, yet it left behind something she had not felt since her arrest. Hope. Small. Fragile. Dangerous. Hope. She stared toward the western mountains where shadows gathered beneath the crimson sky. Somewhere beyond those distant peaks, something was moving. She did not know what it was. She did not know why she felt so certain. But deep inside, beyond fear and beyond reason, Eloria suddenly knew one thing. Her story was not over yet. A single act of kindness can change a life, but sometimes it changes a destiny. 3 days earlier, Moonfall territory had looked completely different. The sky above Ashgrove village glowed with soft silver morning light as merchants arranged fresh goods outside their shops and families began another ordinary day. Eloria Voss moved quietly through the marketplace carrying a woven basket filled with herbs, dried roots, and medicine bottles. Most wolves barely noticed her passing between the stalls. That was nothing unusual. Omegas rarely attracted attention unless something had gone wrong. Eloria preferred it that way. She enjoyed the peaceful rhythm of her life. While ambitious alphas argued over territory politics and noble families competed for influence, she spent her days helping people. She visited elderly wolves who needed company. She prepared remedies for sick children. She cared for injured animals found near the forest trails. It was not an exciting life, but it was a meaningful one. By late afternoon, she finished her final delivery and began the walk home. The narrow trail leading toward her cottage wound through the northern forest where towering pines stretched toward the sky. Sunlight filtered through the branches above, creating shifting patterns across the ground. The air smelled of cedar and fresh earth. For the first time that day, Eloria allowed herself to relax. The sounds of the village faded behind her until only birdsong and rustling leaves remained. Then she heard it. The sound was so faint she almost missed it. It was not a growl, not a cry. Something in between. Weak, strained, unusual. Eloria stopped walking. The forest became still around her. Several seconds passed before the sound came again. Her instincts immediately told her that something was injured. Without thinking twice, she stepped away from the trail and moved toward the source. Thick undergrowth brushed against her legs as she carefully pushed deeper into the trees. The sound grew clearer with every step. Finally, she emerged into a small clearing hidden between ancient pines. The moment she entered, she froze. Something enormous lay beneath the shadow of a fallen tree. At first, she assumed it was a wolf. Then she realized no ordinary wolf could possibly be that large. Even resting on the forest floor, the creature appeared massive. Its fur carried a deep crimson color that looked almost black beneath the fading sunlight. Eloria's heart immediately began racing. Stories she had heard as a child returned without warning. Ancient legends told beside fireplaces during winter storms. Tales of powerful wolves that belonged to no pack. Beings older than kingdoms. Older than councils. Older than history itself. Every instinct told her to leave. Instead, she took a cautious step forward. The creature slowly opened its eyes. Eloria stopped breathing. Crimson eyes met hers. Intelligent eyes. Ancient eyes. Eyes that seemed capable of seeing far more than they should. For several seconds, neither moved. The forest remained completely silent. Then Eloria noticed something else. The creature was injured. One of its front legs trembled slightly whenever it shifted position. Exhaustion surrounded it like a shadow. Whatever journey it had made, it had clearly traveled a long distance. Slowly, Eloria crouched and placed her basket on the ground. "I am not going to hurt you," she said softly. The wolf continued watching her. She removed a canteen from her basket and carefully placed it several feet away before stepping back. Minutes passed. Neither moved. Finally, the wolf lowered its head and drank. Relief washed through her. A small smile appeared on her face. She reached into her basket again and removed several healing herbs she often used for sprains and muscle injuries. Carefully, she placed them near the fallen tree. The wolf watched every movement. Then something unexpected happened. The creature stood. Eloria instinctively stepped backward, not because it appeared threatening, but because standing revealed its true size. It towered above her. Powerful, regal, impossible. Yet there was no hostility in its gaze. Only quiet observation. For a brief moment, the world seemed to disappear around them. No territory. No politics. No pack hierarchy. Just a lonely Omega and a wounded stranger meeting beneath the trees. The wolf lowered its gaze toward the herbs. Then it looked back at her. Something passed between them that Eloria could never fully explain. Not words. Not exactly. More like recognition. As though some invisible thread had suddenly connected two lives that had never met before. A cool wind moved through the clearing. Shadows stretched longer between the trees. Eloria glanced toward the sky and realized evening was approaching. She should leave before darkness settled over the forest. As she turned to go, the wolf suddenly focused on something beyond the clearing. Its posture changed instantly. Alert. Watchful. As though sensing danger nearby. Eloria followed its gaze, but saw nothing except trees. When she looked back, the creature's crimson eyes locked onto hers one final time. Then, just before it disappeared into the forest shadows, she heard a voice. Low. Calm. Almost human. Run. Eloria blinked. The clearing stood empty. The crimson wolf had vanished. Only silence remained beneath the pines. She stood frozen for several moments, staring into the darkness where the creature had disappeared. A strange chill settled across her shoulders. Deep inside, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life had just changed forever. The walk back to Ashgrove Village should have taken less than 30 minutes, yet it felt much longer that evening. Eloria could not stop replaying the encounter inside her mind. Every detail remained vivid. The impossible size of the crimson wolf. The intelligence in its eyes. The strange feeling of recognition she had experienced standing in that hidden clearing. Most of all, she could not forget the single word she believed she had heard. Run. By the time the first lanterns of the village appeared through the trees, dusk had settled across the valley. Families were returning home for dinner. Merchants were closing their shops. Everything looked normal. Comfortingly normal. Yet the uneasy feeling inside her chest refused to disappear. Her cottage stood at the far edge of the village beneath a large maple tree whose branches stretched across the roof like protective arms. The small home had belonged to her grandmother for many years before becoming hers. It was simple but warm, filled with dried herbs, old books, and memories. Eloria stepped inside and closed the door behind her. For several moments, she simply stood there listening to the familiar sounds. The soft ticking of the clock near the fireplace. The creaking of old floorboards. The gentle wind brushing against the windows. No ancient wolves. No mysterious voices. No crimson eyes. She almost convinced herself that exhaustion had exaggerated the entire encounter. Determined to focus on ordinary things, she began preparing tea. She had barely reached for the kettle when a sharp knock echoed through the cottage. Eloria frowned. Visitors were unusual after sunset. A second knock followed almost immediately. More urgent this time. She crossed the room and opened the door. Lyessa Vale stood outside, breathing heavily. There you are, Lyessa said as she stepped inside. I have been looking everywhere for you. Concern immediately crossed Eloria's face. What happened? Lyessa lowered her voice. Several council representatives arrived this afternoon. They called an emergency meeting. Eloria felt a small knot form in her stomach. Emergency meetings rarely meant good news. Do they know why? Lyessa shook her head. Nobody knows for certain, but everyone is talking about something that happened near the northern border. Eloria's pulse quickened. The northern border. The same forest where she had encountered the crimson wolf. She immediately told herself it could not be related. Thousands of things happen near the border every year. Yet the timing felt impossible to ignore. After Lyessa left, sleep refused to come easily. Wind rattled the windows throughout the night. Several times Eloria found herself staring at the ceiling while moonlight spilled across her room. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those crimson eyes staring back at her from the forest shadows. Morning arrived beneath gray clouds. The village atmosphere felt different almost immediately. Wolves gathered in small groups along the streets. Conversations stopped when she approached. People glanced toward her and quickly looked away. By midday, the strange tension had spread throughout Ashgrove. Eloria tried focusing on work, but the feeling followed her everywhere. Shortly after 3 o'clock that afternoon, she returned home carrying supplies from the marketplace. The moment she stepped through the front door, she froze. Her cottage was no longer empty. For council guards stood inside. Their dark uniforms instantly drained the color from her face. A fifth figure waited near the fireplace. Counselor Malrek Duskbane. His expression revealed nothing. Eloria Voss, he said calmly. We need to ask you several questions. Confusion washed over her. About what? Malrek studied her carefully before speaking. Where were you yesterday evening between 6 and 8 o'clock? The question struck her as strangely specific. I was gathering herbs in the northern forest. The room seemed to grow colder. One guard exchanged a glance with another. Malrek nodded slowly. Did anyone see you there? Eloria hesitated. The answer should have been simple. Yet how could she explain what she had seen? Who would believe her? No, she admitted quietly. Silence filled the cottage. Then Malrek stepped aside. One of the guards approached, carrying a cloth bundle. He carefully opened it on the table. Eloria stared at the object inside and felt her breath catch. It was a silver council medallion. She recognized it immediately. Every noble alpha carried one. The problem was not the medallion itself. The problem was where they claimed it had been discovered. Malrek's voice remained calm. This was found beneath your bed earlier today. For several seconds, Eloria could not speak. Her mind simply refused to process what she was hearing. That is impossible, she finally whispered. Yet even as the words left her mouth, she knew nobody in the room believed her. Outside, church bells echoed across Ashgrove Village. Beyond the distant rooftops, dark clouds continued gathering above the northern forest. And for the first time, Eloria realized she was no longer standing near a mystery. She was standing at the center of a carefully constructed trap. The journey to Moonfall Court felt unreal. Eloria sat silently inside a council carriage as rolling hills and dark forests passed beyond the narrow window. Guards rode alongside on horseback, their dark cloaks snapping in the wind. No one spoke to her. No one explained what would happen next. The silver medallion had changed everything. By sunset, rumors had spread across half the territory. By sunrise, those rumors had transformed into accepted truth. Somewhere between accusation and repetition, doubt had disappeared. Moonfall Court stood atop a high ridge overlooking the valley below. Massive stone walls surrounded ancient towers that had governed the territory for generations. Eloria had visited only twice before, both times delivering medicine during severe winter illnesses. Back then, the place had seemed noble. Now it felt cold. As the carriage passed through the enormous gates, dozens of wolves turned to stare. Conversations stopped. Eyes followed her every movement. Eloria lowered her gaze and focused on breathing. The hearing began that same afternoon. Hundreds of spectators filled the great chamber. Council members occupied elevated seats overlooking the floor, while Eloria sat alone at a simple wooden table positioned directly beneath them. The imbalance was impossible to ignore. One Omega facing an entire council. One voice against many. Counselor Malrek Duskbane stood near the center of the room and calmly presented the accusations. The missing noble alpha. The silver medallion. Witness statements. Timelines. Circumstances. Each piece sounded convincing when arranged together. Eloria listened carefully as the invisible net tightened around her. Every explanation seemed to point toward the same conclusion, yet none of it made sense. When her turn finally came to speak, she answered every question honestly. She described her walk through the northern forest. She explained finding the injured Crimson Wolf. Murmurs immediately spread through the chamber. Several council members exchanged skeptical looks. One elderly alpha actually laughed. You expect us to believe that? He asked. Eloria straightened slightly. It is the truth. The alpha shook his head. A giant crimson wolf from ancient legends appears in the forest, accepts your help, then vanishes. More laughter followed. Eloria felt heat rise in her face, but she refused to look away. I know how it sounds, but it happened. The room remained unconvinced. The hearing continued for hours. Witness after witness repeated observations, assumptions, and rumors. None had seen her commit any crime. None had direct proof. Yet somehow certainty continued growing with every testimony. By evening, exhaustion settled into every muscle in her body. What troubled her most was not the evidence itself. It was what nobody seemed interested in discussing. No one questioned how the medallion appeared beneath her bed. No one considered who might benefit from placing it there. No one asked whether someone wanted investigators looking at her instead of somewhere else. As twilight approached, the council suspended the hearing until the following morning. Guards escorted Eloria through narrow stone corridors and down a winding staircase leading to a holding room beneath the western tower. The room was surprisingly clean. A narrow bed rested against one wall. A small window overlooked the distant forest. Alone at last, Eloria sat beside the window and stared toward the northern hills. The trees appeared almost black beneath the fading sky. Somewhere out there, answers existed. Somewhere out there, she had encountered a creature no one else seemed willing to believe. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned toward the iron gate. Relief immediately washed over her. Lyessa stood outside. "You came," Eloria said softly. Lyessa managed a weak smile. "Of course I came." The guard allowed only a few minutes. Lyessa moved closer and lowered her voice. "Something feels wrong about all of this." Eloria almost laughed. "That makes two of us." Lyessa glanced over her shoulder before continuing. "People are saying the council wants a quick verdict." Eloria felt her stomach tighten. "How quick?" Lyessa hesitated. "Very quick." Silence settled between them. Finally, Lyessa reached through the bars and squeezed her friend's hand. "I believe you." Those 3 words nearly broke her. After Lyessa left, darkness settled across Moonfall Court. Thick clouds covered the stars. Wind whispered through the ancient stone walls. Sleep refused to come. Near midnight, Eloria rose from the bed and returned to the window. The northern forest remained visible beneath pale moonlight. She closed her eyes and forced herself to remember every detail of that evening. The clearing, the fallen tree, the crimson eyes. Then suddenly a memory surfaced that she had overlooked. The wolf had not simply appeared injured. It had seemed alert, watchful, as though expecting danger. Her eyes opened. Her heartbeat quickened. What if the warning had never been about the wolf itself? What if the single word she heard had been meant for her? Run. A cold sensation traveled down her spine. For the first time since her arrest, the pieces began forming a different picture. She had not stumbled into a random investigation. She had stumbled into someone else's secret. And whoever was protecting that secret seemed willing to sacrifice her to keep the truth buried. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of heavy gray clouds. The atmosphere inside Moonfall Court felt different the moment Eloria opened her eyes. Footsteps echoed constantly through the hallways beyond her room. Guards moved with unusual urgency. Council officials carried stacks of documents through the corridors. Something had changed overnight. Shortly after sunrise, the iron gate opened and 2 guards informed her that the final hearing would begin within the hour. Eloria followed them through winding stone passages toward the great chamber. Long before they reached the doors, she could already hear voices gathering beyond them. Hundreds of voices. News of the trial had spread across the territory. Wolves from distant settlements had traveled for hours to witness the outcome. When the massive doors finally opened, the sight nearly stole her breath. Every seat was occupied. Spectators lined the walls. Additional wolves crowded the upper balconies overlooking the chamber below. The entire territory seemed determined to watch. Eloria walked toward the center platform as whispers followed her from every direction. Some voices carried sympathy. Most carried suspicion. A few carried open hostility. Yet what struck her most was how certain everyone appeared. They had already decided who she was long before hearing the final verdict. The hearing began immediately. Counselor Malrek Duskbane rose and addressed the crowd. His voice carried easily throughout the enormous chamber. Once again he reviewed the accusations. The missing noble alpha, the recovered medallion, the witness statements, the timeline. Each piece sounded convincing when presented together. Eloria listened carefully. The more she listened, the more one fact became impossible to ignore. Every accusation depended on assumptions. No one had actually seen her commit any crime. No one could explain how the medallion appeared beneath her bed. No one had investigated any alternative possibility. Yet somehow certainty had replaced proof. When Malrek finally finished, he turned toward her. "Eloria Voss, do you have anything further to say in your defense?" Hundreds of eyes shifted toward her. The chamber fell silent. Slowly, Eloria rose to her feet. Fear remained inside her, but another emotion had begun growing beside it. Determination. "I am innocent," she said clearly. Murmurs immediately swept through the crowd. She continued before anyone could interrupt. "I understand that my words may not change your minds. I understand that the evidence appears convincing. But I ask one simple question. If I truly planned this crime, Why would I leave evidence beneath my own bed? Silence followed. Several spectators exchanged uncertain glances. Even a few council members frowned slightly. Eloria pressed forward. Someone wanted that medallion discovered. Someone wanted investigators looking at me and nowhere else. Malrek immediately responded. That is speculation. Eloria met his gaze. So is the story being told about me. The room grew noticeably quieter. For the first time, uncertainty appeared among portions of the audience. Malrek's expression hardened. He called additional witnesses. One after another, they repeated rumors, observations, and assumptions. None directly proved anything. Yet together they reinforced the same narrative. By midday, the council withdrew to deliberate. The crowd spilled into hallways and courtyards while everyone waited. Eloria remained under guard inside a small room overlooking the valley. Through a narrow window, she watched dark clouds gathering once again above the northern forest. The sight sent a chill through her. Those clouds seemed to appear whenever her thoughts returned to the Crimson Wolf. Hours passed. Finally, a bell echoed throughout Moonfall Court. The decision had been reached. Spectators hurried back into the chamber. Conversations died away as everyone resumed their seats. Eloria returned to the center platform. This time, even the air felt heavier. Malrek stood alongside the other council members. Their faces revealed nothing. Silence stretched for several long seconds before he finally spoke. After reviewing the evidence presented before this council, a verdict has been reached. Eloria's heartbeat echoed inside her ears. Somewhere beyond the stained glass windows, distant thunder rolled across the mountains. Malrek unfolded a parchment. The council finds sufficient cause to uphold the charges against Eloria Voss. Gasps erupted throughout the chamber. Some spectators nodded as though expecting nothing else. Others appeared troubled. Eloria immediately searched the crowd until she found Lyessa standing near the back. Tears filled her friend's eyes. Eloria felt the world narrow around her. She heard the remaining words, yet they seemed to arrive from far away. The sentence would be carried out publicly at sunset before witnesses from across the territory. Final. Immediate. Public. Conversations exploded throughout the chamber as guards stepped toward her. Yet something unexpected caught her attention. As Malrek lowered the parchment, their eyes briefly met. For the smallest moment, she thought she saw something hidden behind his calm expression. Not confidence. Not satisfaction. Concern. As though he feared something might still happen before sunset arrived. The realization struck her unexpectedly. If the council truly believed the matter was settled, why did several members appear nervous? Why did they keep glancing toward the northern windows? And why, beyond those windows, were dark clouds gathering directly above the forest where a crimson-eyed stranger had disappeared only days earlier? The hours between the verdict and sunset passed with unbearable slowness. Eloria sat alone inside the western tower while long shadows stretched across Moonfall Court. Outside her narrow window, the territory continued to gather. Wolves arrived from distant villages. Carriages filled the roads leading toward the court. By late afternoon, the enormous stone plaza below was crowded with spectators waiting for the final ceremony. Yet despite the noise, a strange tension lingered in the air. People spoke quietly. Guards repeatedly checked the gates. Even council members appeared distracted. It was as though everyone sensed something approaching but could not name it. When the tower door finally opened, Eloria rose without resistance. For guards escorted her through winding corridors and down a broad staircase leading toward the central plaza. The moment she stepped outside, a cool wind brushed against her face. Instinctively, she looked toward the sky. The weather had changed again. Dark clouds covered nearly every patch of blue. Only a narrow band of crimson sunlight remained along the western horizon. The color immediately reminded her of the eyes she had seen in the forest. The memory surfaced so suddenly that it almost stopped her in place. Crimson eyes. A quiet warning. Run. She had spent days questioning whether she imagined that voice. Standing beneath the strange sky now, she was no longer certain it had been imagination at all. The crowd slowly parted as the guards guided her toward the center platform. Thousands of eyes followed her movement. Some spectators looked satisfied. Others appeared uncomfortable. Many simply looked curious. To them, this had become a story, a mystery, a spectacle. Few seemed to remember that a real person stood at the center of it. Eloria climbed the stone steps, and took her place beneath the fading light. The wind continued strengthening. Banners snapped overhead. Counselor Malrek Duskbane stepped forward and raised a hand for silence. Gradually, the crowd obeyed. The enormous plaza became unnaturally quiet. Malrek began formally reciting the verdict so all witnesses could hear. His voice remained steady, but Eloria noticed something she had missed before. His eyes repeatedly drifted toward the northern horizon. Not once, not twice, again and again, as though he expected something to appear. The realization tightened her chest. She followed his gaze. Beyond the court walls, beyond the forests and valleys, distant mountains stood shrouded in shadow. Thunder rolled faintly among the peaks. Several spectators glanced upward. Unease spread through the crowd like ripples across still water. Malrek continued speaking, though now even he seemed eager to finish. When he finally lowered the parchment, silence settled once more. Sunset approached. The crimson band along the horizon deepened. Eloria slowly closed her eyes. Strangely, she no longer felt panic. Fear remained, but it no longer controlled her. Instead, she found herself thinking about the hidden forest clearing, about a wounded stranger she had chosen to help despite every reason to walk away. If this truly was the end, she did not regret that choice. Not for a second. Suddenly, a powerful gust swept across the plaza, strong enough to extinguish several torches at once. Gasps echoed through the crowd. People turned toward the northern sky. Eloria opened her eyes. The clouds were moving, not drifting naturally, moving with purpose, rotating above the mountains in a vast spiral of gray and crimson. The temperature dropped noticeably. Wolves throughout the plaza exchanged nervous looks. Some stepped backward. Others stared upward in stunned silence. Then came the sound, low at first, distant, so deep that it seemed to vibrate through the stone beneath their feet. Every conversation ended instantly. The sound came again. Not thunder, not wind. Something older, something alive. A visible shiver passed through the crowd. Several powerful alphas stiffened. Others lowered their heads without seeming to understand why. Ancient instincts moved through them before conscious thought could catch up. Eloria felt it too. Yet her reaction was different. Where others seemed frightened, she felt recognition. The mysterious sound rolled across the valley one final time. Closer now. Much closer. Thousands of faces turned toward the northern gate. Guards stepped forward uncertainly. Council members exchanged alarmed glances. Even Malrek's confidence appeared to crack for the first time. Another wave of wind swept through Moonfall Court. The clouds above continued turning. The strange pressure in the air grew stronger. Every wolf present could feel it. Something extraordinary was approaching. Something powerful enough to make seasoned warriors uneasy and experienced leaders nervous. Eloria stared toward the distant gate as her heartbeat quickened. Deep inside, beyond logic and beyond fear, she suddenly knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was coming had already arrived at the edge of Moonfall territory, and it was heading directly toward her. Silence settled over Moonfall Court with a weight that felt almost physical. Thousands of wolves stood frozen throughout the plaza, their eyes fixed on the northern gate. The strange presence continued drawing closer. Not hurried, not hidden, deliberate, certain, like something that had never needed permission to enter any territory. The wind intensified, sweeping across the court and sending banners snapping through the air. Above the valley, dark clouds rotated slowly in a vast spiral streaked with crimson light. Eloria could feel every heartbeat inside her chest. Around her, powerful alphas who had spent their entire lives commanding others suddenly appeared uncertain. Some looked nervous. Others looked genuinely afraid. One elderly alpha near the front lowered his head and whispered a prayer beneath his breath. Then the gates opened. No guard touched them. No command was given. The massive iron doors simply swung inward. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A figure emerged from the shadows beyond the walls. At first, many spectators struggled to understand what they were seeing. Then realization spread through the plaza. A wolf. Enormous. Larger than any wolf recorded in the history of Moonfall territory. Crimson fur reflected the fading sunset, like living fire beneath the storm-dark sky. Every step carried impossible authority. The creature crossed the stone roadway without hesitation. Wolves throughout the crowd instinctively moved aside to clear a path. No one ordered them to move. They simply did. Ancient instincts older than memory compelled obedience. Eloria stared in disbelief. She recognized those eyes immediately. Crimson. Intelligent. Unforgettable. The same eyes that had watched her from beneath the fallen tree. The same eyes she had seen in the hidden clearing 3 days earlier. Whispers exploded throughout the plaza. Ancient stories. Forgotten legends. Names spoken only during winter nights beside fireplaces. Councillor Malrek Duskbane had gone completely pale. Several council members exchanged alarmed glances. Others seemed unable to move at all. The giant wolf continued forward until it reached the center of the court directly before the execution platform. Then it stopped. For several long moments, neither Eloria nor the creature moved. The entire territory seemed to stop breathing. Then something extraordinary happened. The wolf lowered its head, not in submission, in recognition. The gesture was subtle, yet every witness understood its meaning. Eloria felt emotion tighten her throat. Somehow, despite everything that had happened, she felt no fear, only certainty. The creature remembered her. It remembered the frightened Omega who had offered water and healing herbs without expecting anything in return. Thunder echoed above the mountains. Crimson light flashed across the clouds. The wolf slowly lifted its gaze toward the council platform. The reaction was immediate. Several alphas instinctively stepped backward. Others lowered their eyes. One council member nearly stumbled while retreating toward his chair. The balance of power that had controlled the entire trial suddenly shifted. Not through force, through presence alone. Then the wolf began to change. Gasps erupted throughout Moonfall Court. Crimson light surrounded the massive figure. Wind spiraled across the plaza. Spectators shielded their eyes. When the light faded, a man stood where the legendary wolf had stood moments before. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing marked with ancient silver, symbols unfamiliar to most wolves present. His dark hair carried subtle crimson highlights beneath the fading sunlight. Yet it was his eyes that silenced the crowd completely. The same impossible crimson eyes. Ancient, calm, unyielding. The stranger slowly surveyed Moonfall Court. No one spoke. No one dared interrupt. Finally, his gaze settled upon Eloria. "You should have listened to my warning," he said quietly. The sound of his voice sent a visible shiver through portions of the crowd. Despite everything, Eloria almost smiled. "I tried," she answered softly. For the briefest moment, amusement touched his expression. Then he turned toward the council. The warmth vanished instantly. "Release her." The command was simple, yet it carried unquestionable authority. Malrek swallowed hard. "You have no jurisdiction over Moonfall territory." The statement sounded far less confident than intended. The stranger's crimson eyes narrowed slightly. "Do I not?" Silence followed. Then something even more astonishing happened. An elderly alpha near the front slowly dropped to one knee. Shock swept through the crowd. Another alpha followed. Then another. Within seconds, wolves throughout the plaza began lowering their heads. Not because they were ordered to, because they recognized him. Or perhaps because something ancient within their blood recognized him before their minds could understand why. Confusion spread among the spectators. Eloria stared in astonishment as warriors, nobles, and respected leaders reacted with visible reverence. The stranger remained completely unmoved by any of it. His attention never left the council platform. "You accused an innocent woman," he said calmly. "You ignored questions that should have been answered. You accepted conclusions before seeking truth." A terrible silence settled across Moonfall Court. For the first time since her arrest, Eloria saw genuine fear on the faces of those who had condemned her. And deep inside, she realized that the trial everyone had come to witness was over. A far more important judgment was about to begin. For several long seconds, no one moved. The wind swept across Moonfall Court, while thousands of stunned wolves struggled to understand what they had just witnessed. Eloria stood at the center of the platform, unable to look away from the stranger with crimson eyes. Around them, respected alphas remained on one knee. Others stood frozen in disbelief. Councillor Malrek Duskbane finally found his voice. "Who are you?" he asked. The question echoed across the silent plaza. The stranger slowly turned toward him. "A name your ancestors once swore never to forget," he replied calmly. A murmur spread through the crowd. Then an elderly alpha near the front suddenly staggered backward. His face had gone pale. "It cannot be," he whispered. Every eye shifted toward him. The old alpha lowered his head. Valor Crimsonbane. The name struck the crowd like a wave. Wolves exchanged confused glances. Some recognized it immediately. Others searched their memories for stories heard long ago beside winter fires. Valor remained silent. His crimson eyes never left the council platform. The elderly alpha spoke again. The first bloodline. The Crimson Guardian. Fear and reverence spread throughout the plaza. Yet Valor showed no interest in either. Instead, he slowly stepped forward. 3 days ago, he said calmly, an alpha noble disappeared near the northern border. Several council members exchanged alarmed glances. An investigation began before questions were asked. A verdict was prepared before answers were found. Malrek's jaw tightened. The evidence was clear. Valor's gaze shifted toward him. Was it? Silence followed. Then Valor lifted one hand. Did you investigate who placed the medallion beneath her bed? No answer came. Did you investigate who first reported finding it? Still silence. Did you investigate why every witness appeared within hours of one another? Unease spread through the crowd. Wolves began exchanging uncertain looks. The questions sounded painfully obvious now. Valor slowly turned his attention toward the far end of the council platform. A younger council member stood there, Darian Blackmore. Until that moment, he had remained nearly invisible among the others. Now Valor's crimson eyes locked directly onto him. The reaction was immediate. Darian's face lost all color. Eloria noticed it. So did everyone else. The plaza fell silent once more. Valor took a single step forward. Would you like me to explain how the medallion reached her cottage, Counselor Blackmore? A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Darian visibly stiffened. Malrek turned sharply toward him. What is he talking about? Darian did not answer. Valor continued. Or should I explain why a messenger carrying your seal traveled to the northern border 2 nights before the noble Alpha disappeared? The younger council member looked as though he could barely breathe. Around the plaza, confusion rapidly transformed into suspicion. Valor allowed the silence to grow. Truth does not fear questions, he said. Only deception fears them. A voice suddenly rose from the crowd. I know that messenger. Hundreds of heads turned. An older guard stepped forward from among the spectators. His expression was tense. I saw him leave the court. Counselor Blackmore ordered him to keep the trip secret. The crowd erupted into shocked whispers. Darian's composure finally cracked. You do not understand, he said quickly. You do not know what was at stake. Valor's expression hardened. Then explain it. Darian looked around desperately. The noble Alpha found something in the northern forest. Something that could have changed everything. Eloria's heartbeat quickened. Valor remained perfectly still. Darian swallowed hard. We believed it was connected to the old legends. To the Crimson bloodline. Another wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Suddenly the pieces began fitting together. The missing noble. The rushed investigation. The planted evidence. Darian lowered his head. The moment we learned an Omega had been seen near the same area, she became the easiest solution. Shock swept through Moonfall Court. Eloria felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She had not been accused because of evidence. She had been accused because she was convenient. Valor finally turned toward the crowd. Eloria Voss was never the threat. His voice carried effortlessly across the plaza. She was the distraction. No one spoke. No one argued. Because everyone knew he was right. An Omega healer living alone near the forest had been the perfect scapegoat. Valor's gaze returned to Eloria. For the first time, warmth appeared in his expression. You were chosen because you were kind. The words struck her unexpectedly. Kindness makes people predictable, he continued. And predictable people are often exploited by those who mistake kindness for weakness. Emotion tightened her throat. Throughout her life, she had believed kindness was something simple. Tonight she realized how powerful it truly was. Valor looked back toward the council. The warmth vanished instantly. This deception ends now. Above Moonfall Court, the storm clouds finally began to break apart. Moonlight spilled across the ancient stone walls. And before thousands of stunned witnesses, the carefully constructed lie that had nearly destroyed Eloria Voss finally collapsed beneath the weight of the truth. For several moments after Darian Blackmore's confession, Moonfall Court stood in absolute silence. Thousands of wolves stared at the council platform as the truth settled over the territory like a storm finally breaking. The accusations, the witnesses, the investigation. None of it had been about justice. It had been about convenience. Darian slowly lowered his head. The confidence he once carried had vanished completely. I never intended for it to go this far, he said quietly. His voice barely carried across the plaza. Yet everyone heard it, because no one dared speak. I thought I was protecting the council. A bitter laugh escaped one of the older alphas standing nearby. You were protecting yourself. The words struck harder than any accusation. Darian closed his eyes. Around him, council members stepped away as though seeing him for the first time. Wolves who had once respected him now looked upon him with disappointment. Not anger. Disappointment. Somehow that felt worse. At the center of the court, Eloria stood motionless. 3 days earlier, she had been a forgotten healer living quietly beside the northern forest. Now the entire territory knew her name. Yet she felt no triumph. No satisfaction. Only relief. Relief that the truth had survived. Councillor Malrek Duskbane finally stepped forward. The proud leader of Moonfall territory looked older than he had only an hour earlier. He turned toward Eloria and slowly bowed his head. Gasps spread throughout the crowd. No one could remember the last time a council leader had bowed before an Omega. Then something even more remarkable happened. One by one, the remaining council members followed his example. Heads lowered across the platform. A public acknowledgement that they had failed. Malrek's voice was steady when he finally spoke. Eloria Voss, before every witness gathered here tonight, I admit that we failed our duty. We accepted conclusions before seeking truth. We allowed fear to guide judgment. And because of that failure, an innocent woman stood alone. Silence followed. Then wolves throughout the plaza began lowering their heads as well. Not because they were ordered to, because they wanted to. Some had repeated rumors. Others had accepted accusations without question. Many now understood how easily fear had influenced them. Eloria felt emotion rise in her chest. Never in her life had she imagined seeing something like this. Valor Crimsonbane watched quietly from beside her. His expression remained calm, unmoved by power, unmoved by status. Yet when his gaze settled upon Eloria, something softened in his eyes. You judged her weakness, Valor said to the crowd. His voice carried effortlessly across the court. I witnessed her strength. Every wolf listened. When others would have walked away, she stopped. When others would have feared, she showed compassion. When others saw danger, she saw someone in need. No one argued, because everyone understood exactly what he meant. The wolves gathered there had spent years measuring worth through rank, influence, and bloodline. Yet the woman standing before them possessed none of those things. What she possessed was character, and somehow that had proven far more powerful. The moon climbed higher above the valley. Silver light spilled across the ancient stones of Moonfall Court. Eloria looked toward Valor. One question remained in her heart. Why did you really come back? She asked softly. The plaza grew silent once more. Valor studied her for several moments before answering. Because when I looked into your eyes beneath those trees 3 nights ago, I recognized something I believed had vanished from this world. Eloria frowned slightly. What? For the first time, uncertainty appeared in the ancient guardian's expression. Hope. The answer surprised everyone, even her. Valor glanced toward the moonlit sky. For centuries I have watched wolves seek power, status, control. Very few still choose kindness when kindness offers them nothing in return. His gaze returned to hers. You did. Emotion tightened Eloria's throat. Then suddenly a soft silver glow appeared near her wrist. Gasps erupted across the plaza. Eloria looked down in surprise. A delicate crescent-shaped symbol shimmered briefly against her skin before fading into the moonlight. The crowd stared in stunned silence. Several elders exchanged shocked looks. One of them whispered a single phrase. The moon's blessing. Murmurs spread instantly through the spectators. Ancient stories spoke of rare moments when destiny revealed itself through signs no wolf could explain. Eloria looked toward Valor. He seemed just as surprised as everyone else. Then a small smile touched his face. Not the smile of a legend. Not the smile of a guardian. Simply the smile of someone witnessing the beginning of something unexpected. Around them, applause slowly began spreading throughout Moonfall Court. Warm. Genuine. Earned. Wolves who had arrived expecting judgment now witnessed redemption. Wolves who had arrived believing a lie now departed carrying the truth. And as moonlight bathed the valley in silver, Eloria realized that her story had never truly been about accusations, trials, or ancient legends. It had always been about a simple choice made in a forest clearing. One act of kindness, one moment of compassion, and the extraordinary future that followed because she chose to help a stranger when nobody else would.